It was a cold November morning in the peaceful college town of Moscow, Idaho. But inside a student rental home on King Road, 4 young lives were brutally taken in a savage massacre that stunned all of America. A masked intruder, silent and methodical, broke in and left behind a blood-soaked crime scene. Strangely, the suspect turned out to be a graduate student in criminology, someone who should have known how to prevent crime, not commit it. Why did he do it? Here's the full truth. On the night of November 12 and into the early hours of November 13, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students, Madison Mogen, 21, Kaylee Goncalves, 21, Xana Kernodle, 20, and Xana's boyfriend Ethan Chapin, 20, returned to their rental home at 1122 King Road after enjoying a weekend night out. The 3-story house was often visited by friends, so nobody paid much attention to people coming and going. 2 other housemates were asleep on the first floor, while the 4 victims remained upstairs on the second and third floors. Around 4 a.m., while everyone was sleeping, a stranger, dressed in black, wearing a full face mask, carrying a military-style folding knife, silently entered the house. According to the investigation, the killer went through the back door, which was left unlocked, then climbed the stairs. He first targeted Madison and Kaylee's bedroom on the 3rd floor. The 2 girls were sleeping in the same bed, completely defenseless. The killer acted swiftly and ruthlessly, attacking repeatedly so they had no chance to scream for help. Fatal wounds to their chests and necks ended their lives in mere seconds. Next, he moved down to the 2nd floor, where Xana and Ethan were sleeping. Strange noises had apparently awakened Xana, and she may have tried to resist or run away, as evidence showed blood traces outside the hallway. Ethan, probably hearing her cries, rushed out to help, but was stabbed viciously as well. Xana was also killed shortly after in a brief struggle. After the murders, the killer left the house through the back door, vanishing into the night. From entering to escaping, it took an estimated 20 minutes, but that was enough to wipe out 4 promising young lives. The 2 housemates on the first floor survived. One later testified that she opened her door and saw a black-clad masked man walking past, but was so terrified she locked her door and stayed silent until morning. By noon on November 13th, one of the surviving housemates discovered the blood-soaked bodies and called police in sheer panic. When officers arrived, they described the scene as horrific, with blood splattered across walls and floors and clear signs of desperate struggles. It was such a cruel crime that the entire Idaho community was shaken. People quickly placed candles and flowers outside the house, while reporters from across America flooded into Moscow within hours. Investigators began combing through hundreds of leads, checking neighborhood surveillance cameras, but there was no clear footage of the killer's face. The only important evidence they found was a military-style knife sheath left on the bed in Madison and Kaylee's room, containing a trace of unknown DNA. This DNA sample did not match any criminals in the FBI's database, stalling the investigation for several weeks. As residents lived in fear, police urgently brought in DNA genealogy experts to try a new approach, tracing the suspect through distant relatives in civilian ancestry databases. At the same time, detectives checked all white sedan cars in the area around 4:20 a.m. on that night, after a blurry camera showed a sedan moving slowly nearby. All the clues began to point to Bryan Kohberger, a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University, about 15 minutes from the crime scene. Bryan was 28 years old at the time, educated, no criminal history, and had deeply studied homicide behavior. This made the public even more horrified. The person who understood crime so well turned out to be the one who committed it. Once Bryan became a prime suspect, police secretly tracked his every move. They traced his phone data and discovered Bryan had been near the victim's house on multiple nights before the murders, strong signs of stalking and planning. When Bryan returned to visit his parents in Pennsylvania for the holidays, police secretly collected trash from the family home for DNA testing. The results were shocking, a perfect match with the DNA on the knife sheath. On December 30th, 2022, police raided Bryan Kohberger's parents' house in Pennsylvania, arresting him in his bedroom. At the scene, they seized dark clothing, gloves, knives, and electronic devices for examination. Bryan was then extradited to Idaho to face 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary with a weapon. News of Bryan's arrest spread everywhere. A graduate criminology student who once joined discussion groups about serial killers was now accused of murdering 4 innocent students. It was a huge shock for American society. At the first court hearing, Bryan kept a calm face, declared his innocence, and demanded a fair trial. But the prosecutor's evidence was too strong. Matching DNA, phone data, camera images, the witness testimony, and his pattern of stalking all formed a tight web. Thousands of Idaho residents gathered, lighting candles to remember the victims, demanding justice come quickly. Across the country, people followed each pretrial hearing, trying to understand how a swath of educated young man, seemingly normal, could become such a cold-blooded killer. After Bryan Kohberger was arrested, the mysteries surrounding this ruthless killer began to unravel. A criminology PhD student, someone who should have known investigative methods inside out, turned out to be the prime suspect in the slaughter of 4 young students. How did he evade capture for so long? And how hard did the police have to work to uncover the truth? This gripping investigation story will keep you on the edge of your seat. Bryan Kohberger, 28 years old, was no stranger in the world of criminology studies. He was pursuing a doctoral degree at Washington State University, barely 15 minutes away from the crime scene. According to his records, Bryan had an intense passion for criminal studies, regularly attending seminars and courses about criminal psychology and serial killer behavior. Classmates described him as quiet, reserved, sometimes odd, and extremely curious about how serial murder investigations worked. This detail made many people shiver. The man who stole the lives of Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan was precisely someone who best understood how to hide his tracks. Bryan left almost no footprints, no usable fingerprints at the crime scene, and wore gloves while committing the murders. He even switched off his phone during the crime window to avoid being located. However, no crime is truly perfect. Bryan's fatal mistake was leaving behind the knife sheath in the third-floor bedroom. On it, forensic experts found a DNA trace, the only crucial clue to break through the mystery. Police working with the FBI entered that sample into the National Criminal Database, but there was no match. Bryan had no criminal record, so his DNA had never been stored. Facing a deadlock, the investigators turned to genealogy, tracing the suspect through distant relatives in commercial ancestry databases, where millions of Americans had voluntarily uploaded their DNA. After weeks of searching, they located some of Bryan's distant relatives and reconstructed a family tree that pointed back to him. This advanced technology, which had solved many cold cases before, once again proved its astonishing power. At the same time, police reviewed security cameras within a 1-kilometer radius around the crime scene. A blurry video showed a white Hyundai Elantra sedan driving slowly near King Road around 4:20 a.m. Bryan Kohberger was registered as the owner of precisely this type of car. From there, the puzzle pieces began to click. DNA matched, the vehicle matched, and his phone records showed Bryan had driven by the victim's house on multiple occasions before the murders. Investigators suspected he had stalked the victims ahead of time to choose the best time and place to strike. A chilling detail, phone data indicated Bryan drove by the crime house again a few hours after the killings, which experts explained as a typical return to the crime scene pattern seen in many serial killers who want to watch the aftermath of their own crime. During surveillance in Pennsylvania, police secretly collected trash from Bryan's parents' home. One of the DNA samples from that trash matched perfectly with the DNA from the knife sheath, enough to apply for a warrant and move in. On December 30th, 2022, a SWAT team stormed Bryan's bedroom and arrested him on the spot. He was reportedly surprised, but did not resist, staring coldly as he was handcuffed and led away. This arrest sent shockwaves across America. News agencies everywhere focused on Idaho, digging into Bryan's past. Everyone asked why a smart, law-guiding student turned into a cold-blooded killer. Bryan had been bullied as a child, developed antisocial tendencies, and suffered from low self-esteem about his weight and social standing. Later, he lost weight, performed well academically, but seemingly held on to a twisted obsession with power and control. Some experts theorize he wanted to reclaim power by taking other people's lives, a warped fulfillment combining his academic knowledge and a sick fantasy. After Bryan was extradited to Idaho, he faced 4 first-degree murder charges, plus 1 count of burglary with a deadly weapon. At his first hearing, he calmly pleaded not guilty. His defense lawyers argued that the DNA might have been contaminated and that many thousands of people owned Hyundai Elantras. But prosecutors fired back, saying the chain of evidence was solid. Camera images, phone tracking data, the knife sheath DNA, the witnesses' sighting, and Bryan's repeated surveillance of the house all created an airtight case. The people of Idaho and the entire nation followed each hearing with bated breath. The victims' families came to court in tears, describing how their children had been full of dreams and life the day before the killings. They could not understand how their loved ones ended up butchered in their own bedrooms. The local police also faced tremendous pressure as the public demanded swift justice. Investigators insisted Bryan had acted with a deliberate plan, not randomly. Bringing a knife, wearing all black, using gloves, stalking the house many times beforehand, everything suggested a cold, calculated mission. Choosing 4 vibrant, popular, well-loved young people may have also reflected deep-seated jealousy and a desire to demonstrate twisted power. Outside the courthouse, mourners held photos of the victims, lit candles, and chanted for justice. On social media, countless videos analyzed every bit of evidence, drawing millions of views. This became one of Idaho's most shocking crimes ever, making families across the state fearful, prompting universities to upgrade security with more cameras and stronger locks. As the pre-trial hearings stretched through 2024, Bryan Kohberger maintained his not guilty plea, but investigators kept strengthening the case, bringing in DNA experts, phone analysts, and even criminal profilers, preparing for a major jury trial by late 2025. If convicted, Bryan faced a death sentence. The victims' families told reporters they wanted Bryan executed, seeing no other punishment fit for such unimaginable cruelty. Yet others feared a death penalty trial could drag on for decades, repeatedly reopening their wounds. Everyone wondered the same thing. Would Bryan ever fully confess and reveal his true motive, or would he keep hiding behind silence forever? Finally, after nearly 3 years of intense investigation in legal battles, Bryan Kohberger, the suspect thought to be the most knowledgeable about criminal investigation techniques, was forced to make a stunning decision. Why did he choose to plead guilty? And what punishment would this cold-blooded killer receive? Let's close the chapter on a case that shook America. By early 2025, the drawn-out pre-trial hearings had pushed Bryan Kohberger into an extremely unfavorable position. The evidence against him had become ironclad, fully matching DNA, phone tracking data, eyewitness testimony, camera images, and behavioral profiling all painted a picture of a premeditated, targeted killer, not a random slayer. Throughout this time, Bryan continued to declare his innocence, refusing to explain any motive, and never clarifying why he had left the knife sheath behind. However, legal experts warned that if he went to a full jury trial, Bryan was almost certain to receive the death penalty. That turning point led his defense team to negotiate with Idaho prosecutors. Bryan would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. After multiple consultations with the victims' families, the prosecutors agreed to spare everyone from a decades-long appeals process. In June 2025, Bryan officially signed a plea deal admitting to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary with a deadly weapon. He accepted 4 consecutive life sentences without parole and an additional maximum 10-year sentence for the burglary charge, also waiving all rights to appeal. American media quickly exploded with this news. A man who insisted he was innocent now bowed his head to the harshest punishment short of execution. During the plea hearing, Bryan remained stone-faced, showing almost no emotion. When the judge asked whether he wished to apologize, he answered curtly that he had nothing else to say. That moment brought many of the victims' family members to tears, seeing the killer of their children still unwilling to show remorse. After sentencing, the community in Moscow, Idaho, gradually regained a sense of calm, though their psychological scars could never fully heal. Madison Mogen's family told reporters they accepted the life sentences because they didn't want years of death penalty appeals to keep reopening their pain. In contrast, Kaylee Goncalves' family expressed deep anger, saying prosecutors had betrayed justice by not pursuing the death penalty, believing only execution could fit the monstrous crime. One question still had no clear answer. What was Bryan's true motive? Investigators speculated he had an obsession with control, possibly rooted in childhood bullying, then distorted through years of studying criminal behavior. Bryan seemed to target 4 bright, well-liked, promising young adults, perhaps to destroy what he felt he could never have. Killing them may have been, in his warped mind, a way to feel powerful and dominant. Although Bryan has never provided an explanation, his behavioral profile showed careful, systematic preparation. He stalked the house for weeks, picked a pre-dawn hour, brought a military knife, wore gloves, all black clothing, and turned off his phone. Everything pointed to a calculated, cold-blooded mission, not a moment of rage. On a social level, this case fundamentally changed safety awareness for countless American families, especially in student housing. After this horror, universities rushed to tighten security rules, install more cameras, reinforce locks, and expand nighttime patrols. Self-defense workshops and See Something, Say Something campaigns spread widely across the country. For law enforcement professionals, the Idaho murders became a textbook example of modern investigation. From a tiny DNA trace on a knife sheath, police combined forensic genealogy, phone data, camera footage, and witness statements into a strong, seamless case. It proved that no matter how smart the criminal, no matter how much they know about law enforcement, they cannot escape justice if investigators work tirelessly and systematically. The final sentencing was handed down in late 2025, sending Bryan Kohberger to a maximum security prison to serve 4 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole or appeal. Barring some miracle, he will die in prison, alone, never again to see the outside world. Dear viewers, this chilling true story is a powerful reminder. Evil can hide behind the most educated, well-spoken, even charming faces. We must always be vigilant, look out for each other, and report strange behaviors, because silence can allow tragedy to flourish. If you found this video meaningful, please click like, share it so more people can learn from it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more real-life crime stories, because vigilance is the strongest shield we can build. Thank you, and see you in the next case.